as well. But welcome to the last session for the day under the theme Funding Equitable Partnerships. And basically, my name is Nana. I am the manager responsible for the South African Researchers Initiative at the National Research Foundation in the department called Strategic Investments, Innovation and Impact. And today we've got 4 keynote speakers who are just going to make a few remarks around the theme of funding equitable partnerships. So the purpose of this panel is basically to explore funders' perspectives on equitable partnerships. Funders have a key role in ensuring international research partnerships are equitable, setting the expectations of equity within projects, widening participation, and supporting institutional capacity strengthening. We've got 4 panel members here. Don't worry, see that guy in the last one, he's hiding behind all of this beard, so it's me, I promise. We've got 4 panel members here, and as I call your name and read your bio, if you can just take a seat for us, just to facilitate the process. Mr. Cephas J. Mensah is a senior civil servant with over 18 years of experience in the civil service of the Republic of Ghana. He is presently the director in charge of research, statistics, and information management at the Ministry of Environment, Science, Technology, and Innovation in Ghana. His role is to provide strategic oversight and leadership for design, use, and development of research and statistics, and provide administrative support for the formulation and development of policy initiatives on science, technology, and innovation. Mr. Cephas Mensah. The next person is Ms. Maria Zaria Tucci. If you can just come to the floor, please. Maria is the Director for International Cooperation, CONFEP, the Brazilian National Council of State Funding Agencies. She has also served as President of the Goiás State, excuse my pronunciation there, Research Support Foundation, and as a Director for Institutional Cooperation at the National Council for Scientific and Technological Development. That's Maria. Next up is Diego Baptista. He's the head of equitable funding at the Wellcome Trust. Diego's team ensures Wellcome take equitable funding approaches to their 5 programs, which is climate and health, infectious diseases, mental health, discovery, research, and Wellcome collection. Diego joined Wellcome Trust in 2018, working in roles focused on positively influencing research culture and ensuring research is open and accessible. He is a researcher trained in experimental biophysics and biochemistry, and he has a history in engaging in activities to increase the diversity of research participants. That is Diego. And my last person on the panel is James Brown. He is the head of ISPF, Funds and Strategic Delivery Strategy Team, the DSIT International IRD. Welcome. I like his beard. Okay, so in this case, we're just going to hand over the mic just for you guys to quickly sort of give your remarks around the theme of funding equitable partnerships in your view and how that experience has been for you over the years in the role that you have.
Thank you very much, Nana, and good evening to you all. Based on the introduction for myself, just not only as a director for research, statistics and information management, but over the years, we've been engaged in the Science Granting Council's initiative in Sub-Saharan Africa. And so I will touch on equitable partnership from the perspective of what we are doing as an AGCI over the past 10 years, moving to AGCI phase 3, and how some of the things that we look for so far as the equitable partnership is concerned. We have seen over the years that the changing landscape in how we look at funding. Early this morning, we heard Professor Karim looking at equitable partnerships in terms of the strategic investment, and also how we look at respect and also trust. Within that same framework, we have seen that funders within the ecosystem are looking about how we co-create together, how we co-contribute together, how we're able to co-design right from, and also how we look at funding. They are quite typical examples that we are looking at within the premises of the Science Country Councils Initiative, part of which probably I can make mention about the long-term Europe-Africa Water, Energy and Food Program, which is being run by 10 members of the Science Country Councils Initiative to the south of Africa, as you all know, Namibia, South Africa, Zimbabwe, Malawi, Zambia, Botswana, then to the eastern part of Africa, Uganda, Tanzania, Kenya, and also our colleagues from Rwanda, to the western part of Africa, Ghana, Sierra Leone, Senegal, Burkina Faso. Now we have Togo joining, and also our brothers from Nigeria. And so the nature of the collaboration, how we be able to pull funds together, supported by our co-funders. Now into the next phase, Wellcome Trust, they've introduced James, and the various partners are DRC, DFG, FCDO, and also NRS South Africa itself. And so it's about how do we mobilize and pull resources together to be able to look at a research agenda that is impactful, that addresses the needs of national priorities, driven not only by the funders, but by the fact that the participants in the funding process are able to drive the initiative together. And so this would be a snapshot in my introductory remark. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much. It's a pleasure to join this panel. I will speak from the Brazilian perspective as Director of International Cooperation of CONFAP, the national council that brings together and articulates 27 state research funding agencies across Brazil. CONFAP represents a highly diverse and decentralized funding system composed of state-level agencies that are deeply embedded in different regional, social, and economic realities. This capillarity gives us a particular perspective on equitability in international research partnerships, one that is grounded in territorial diversity, proximity to local needs, and the inclusion of a wide range of institutions and research communities. From this perspective, equitability in international research partnerships is fundamentally about how funding systems interact, how priorities are defined, and how decision-making processes are shared between countries and across regions. In an increasingly uncertain global context, marked by geopolitical tensions, funding constraints, and the structural inequalities, the role of funders becomes central in shaping the conditions under which international cooperation takes place. For systems like ours, equitability is closely linked to the ability to ensure that international collaboration is not restricted to a small number of institutions or regions, but reflects the diversity of the national research ecosystem. From our experience, funders can support equitable partnerships through different and complementary modalities of cooperation, but these modalities take on a specific meaning when they are implemented within a plural and decentralized system. In bilateral cooperation, for example, cooperation is not only between two countries, but between different funding systems that must align national and subnational priorities and ensure that diverse regional actors are effectively included in international opportunities. In multilateral cooperation, international partnerships and networks allow multiple countries and systems to engage around shared challenges, but they also require mechanisms that prevent concentration of participation and instead promote broad institutional and territorial inclusion. Another important modality is co-funding and co-investment mechanisms, where each side funds its own researchers, but within a common governance framework. In a system like CONFAP's, this allows different state agencies to participate according to their specific context and capacities while remaining part of a shared international strategy. In addition, mobility and capacity building instruments, such as staff exchanges and institutional partnerships, are particularly relevant in decentralized systems as they help reduce asymmetries, not only between countries, but also within countries by strengthening research management capacities across diverse institutions and regions. These modalities are not only technical tools, they reflect institutional choices that shape who sets the agenda, who participates, and who benefits from international collaboration. In plural systems, equitability depends on the ability to aggregate diversity and transform it into a collective international engagement. From a funder's perspective, equitability therefore requires translating principles into funding design and governance structures. This includes joint agenda setting, shared governance and decision-making process, fair recognition of different institutional capacities, and equitability approaches to data ownerships, access, and use. In this sense, equitability is achieved through the roles, procedures, and power distribution embedded in funding instruments. It's also about creating real conditions for ownership by all partners, particularly those from less resourced systems and regions, so that international collaboration becomes a space for co-creation and mutual learning. In terms of outcomes, funders increasingly seek partnerships that generate stronger research systems, long-term institutional relationships, shared knowledge and innovation, and more inclusive participation in global science. For systems like CONFAPs, this also means reinforcing territorial cohesion and reducing internal disparities through international cooperation. However, important challenges remain. These include persistent power asymmetries between funding systems, top-down agendas driven by large institutions or consortia, complex and sometimes incompatible funding roles, and difficulties in ensuring sustainability beyond the project cycles. These challenges show that equitability is not a fixed state, but a continuous process of negotiation, adjustment, and institutional learning, both between countries and within national systems. To conclude, equitable partnerships do not emerge spontaneously. They must be designed, governed, and financed in equitable ways. Funders, therefore, have a critical responsibility, not only to finance research, but to shape the architectures of cooperation that make equity possible. In this sense, equitability is not an ethical principle. It is a matter of funding policy, institutional design, and shared governance. And for plural and decentralized systems like ours, it is precisely through diversity, capillarity, and inclusion that international cooperation can become more equitable and more meaningful. Thank you.
Thank you. Incredibly comprehensive discussion and thinking. So we more or less had the exact same things to say. No. I think we've had some discussions over maybe funder system, government system interactions, and thinking about equitable partnerships within that scope. I'm going to try to reduce the scope a little bit and talk about equitable research partnerships, because that's where we mainly at Wellcome can play a helpful role. So, like everyone here, we're reflecting and clarifying that these research partnerships, they're determined less by good intentions, which everyone here has great intentions, and more by how funding systems allocate and enable power, risk, and control. What I mean is that we all have good intentions, but it's the funding systems and the funding architecture that decides who leads, who holds power, and who benefits long-term, way before partnership begins. If those systems are inequitable, the goodwill can't compensate. It's a Band-Aid for a gap that's going to be huge for a long time. like many funders, although I'm learning a bit more here, we don't have a single formal framework for equitable partnerships. So we have a bunch of patches of guidance and different pieces of how we operate that you might be able to bring up and say, this is what an equitable partnership does, or is how it's embodied at Wellcome, but we don't articulate in that way. We've started to name some of these things a bit more explicitly. We have internal guidance. They set expectations that partnerships, particularly between researchers that we're funding, and particularly between a high-income country and a low-resource setting, they ask questions around who's involved in the local leadership, how is the resourcing and the financing going between the partners, how is the decision-making happening between the partners, and from the applicants themselves is what are the distribution of benefits. So who's being trained, who's getting skills, and how are those being shared. As we know, guidance alone doesn't change systems, and we're increasingly honest with ourselves about that. You have to inoculate a little bit of thinking in this system and then eventually formalize it. We're now embedding these questions directly into our application form, but not as a specific, how is this partnership equitable? We're embedding some of these questions in the different sections of the application. So who leads the research, who's deciding on the research, who controls the resources, and who ultimately benefits. And this isn't because we think a good answer solves the problem, but because what we ask about and what we advise and guide our committees to think about is a signal of what we value. So right now, we're expecting applicants to reflect on partnerships, and our growing equity team also reviews the full funding cycle to identify unintentional oversights in our own processes. When we look at our own data, we know that it's clear that many longstanding funding norms, so eligibility criteria, lead institution requirements, costing models, assessment practices, these systematically advantage already well-resourced institutions. And as I've mentioned before, these inequitable partnerships are not accidental, they're structurally produced. So we're trying to take a more coherent approach to equitable partnerships with how Wellcome works across all of the different domains, how we incentivize research collaborations, how we work with researchers, how we work with other funders, and how we work with systems. The outcomes we're interested in aren't abstract, and we've heard over this day many of the outcomes and benefits of these partnerships. We want to see partnerships where leadership and authority sit closer to where research is conducted. We want benefits, the authorship, skills, infrastructure, influence to be shared more fairly, and we want to be able to, as a funder, learn where our own systems are reinforcing inequity rather than assuming the problem sits solely with applicants or other parts of the system. We see enormous benefit for Wellcome to engage directly on this topic. In a moment of increasing global uncertainty, financial, political, and institutional, I think funders face a real choice in this space. We can default to low risk, easy, familiar options that entrench existing power asymmetries, or we can accept that equitable partnerships require funders to change first and not last. At Wellcome, we pretend we haven't, we don't pretend we've solved this, but we're increasingly convinced that if we're serious about this topic, then reforming our own systems is not optional. As you said, it is the work.
Hi, thanks for having me here today. It's such an interesting topic to talk about, and quite helpfully, my colleague next to me has actually just helped set up a lot of what I was going to say. I must say I agree with a lot of it. So over the course of today, we've had quite a lot of discussions about equitable partnerships, and so I'm actually going to try not to use those two words to help contextualize a little bit more actually what we mean by these things. From where I'm from in the UK, in DSIT, we have, over the past 10 years, spent close to £2 billion through the Newton Fund and the Global Challenges Research Fund on development-facing research. We are, as UK government, committed to spending over £1.5 billion over the next 4 years as well, continuing these kind of research partnerships that we've delivered. But I think we all know we do things a little bit differently depending on what we're actually trying to achieve in this context. And so for me, I think the three most important words for this are context, difference, and relevance. And to illustrate some of this, so the way we funded the Newton Fund and the way we funded GCRF, for example, approached equity in very different ways. the Newton Fund was all about how we're setting up the relationships before any of the research has even started by developing, in the case of this fund, very clear government-to-government agreements where if you imagine we're drawing a Venn diagram of where the UK has a set of interests and the partner country has a set of interests, I'm like, cool, well, this is actually what we're both really interested in. This is where we've both got relevant expertise. It's both relevant to our context. And so we agree this is actually where we're going to take things forward, which also really helps with impact at the other end because you've basically pre-bought into the things that you're doing, which translates quite well to then policy uptake. But it also then means you can quite clearly set the definitions around, well, who's involved in delivering this? Who is responsible for those different bits of delivery? How are we funding this? Is one person funding, the other person providing in kind? Is one person doing this, is one person doing the other? On paper, that all sounds great, right? But this is where the difference part comes in. In practice, unless you've already got a very well-established long-term relationship in this space, we're going to be doing things differently. And it takes time to get that relationship software in the same speed with each other. And so sometimes you have to be a bit forgiving with each other, and we slip up, and we might be overbearing in one regard and not providing enough in another. And I think a lot of actually the way you achieve the equitability further down the line is by allowing those contextual differences to just exist and then work through them, and you bring in those more relevant outcomes from that, which help strengthen the overall. Conversely to that, GCRF was not a bilateral fund. It was very much a bottom-up, sector-driven fund. And so again here, the context of this fund means the way that equity works is in a completely different kettle of fish. We didn't have government-to-government agreements where we're saying, hey, we're both interested in this, we're going to do that. Instead, it's much more, we've got our UK-based sector experts who bring in sector experts from overseas who work together to design researcher-driven programming that they've said, this is really relevant to this context. We've got this relevant set of skills, but we need this other relevant set of support to achieve this outcome. And that's where you bring in those differences through that agreed process to achieve that outcome, which works out to equitability but in a different way. And that can be through processes like bringing in, where you build in Global South representatives into assessment panels, whether you have the definitions of who actually can apply as a PI in the first place. Is it just the UK, or is it we're going overseas? It's geographically agnostic. It's based on where partners have co-funding coming from, all these kind of things. And so I think this is where I go back to my point that it's recognizing the differences and then building building processes and mechanisms based on the context that those differences have come from that allows them to be relevant to achieving that equitable outcome. We've spoken a lot today about actually how the research itself works. So I'm going to leave it there at the stuff that has to happen before the research in order to achieve that equitable outcome.
Thank you very much. I think just before we sort of open the floor for questions and everything, sorry if I just take this a bit. I know there's a lot that has been mentioned around some of the benefits of funding equitable partnerships, the fact that we need a shared framework, even though I think Diego mentioned that there isn't a formal particular framework, for funding equitable partnerships. But at the same time, I think Maria touched on the issue of governance and how those structures are quite important in making sure of that. And I think James just touched on the context and the difference and the relevance between some of these fundings and everything. But I think I just want to throw to the panel in no particular order. What should be avoided when you're trying to look at funding equitable partnerships? We know that there's a lot of challenges. We know that there's benefits that are involved in funding equitable partnerships, but what should be avoided when you are looking at funding equitable partnerships?
I mean, for the work that I do, seeing literally where the money goes is quite important in a partnership, particularly between researchers. With money comes decision-making power, agency on a grant. And so I think it's quite problematic when there's multiple partners that come in as collaborators and all of the money is going to one place. I know that makes it harder for funders to deliver funding, but yeah, I think if you properly care about incentivizing this is something you need to do. And sorry, to clarify, Wellcome doesn't have its own framework. There's loads of frameworks that people have built on equitable partnerships and funding.
Thank you very much. Just to also add that we've realized when we did the report on the funding flows through the agency that was presented, even we can cite an example of this very second Equitable Partnership Forum, where we have British Academy Royal Society and the NRF seeing in each area coming together to support a particular agenda. The overcrowding of funds by the funders themselves. So you see NRF comes in, want to support a particular research in, let's say, in climate. Then RDRC also want to support that same funding also in climate. Then a particular fund also come. Now, these are funds that are revolving within the same, if it whether Sub-Saharan Africa or some institutional research. So the need to be able for funders to identify those particular niche areas where they pull resources together to be able to fund a particular project. So as much as possible, the background check and also some kind of due diligence in trying to ensure that funds that are coming in terms of how they're able to generate those particular impact that we want to get it out of research as a funder are very key in ensuring that as funders, as far as equitable partnership is concerned, these are things that we should, as much as possible, try not to do, because then they have tendencies in trying to create challenges for others. I just want to add about the very last things. Many a times we are looking at impact from the perspective about what is it that the funding or the investment or that strategic investment is going to do, looking at the bigger things. But then we've seen quite recently, even in the presentations, those of us who have been here, Pamela, Kimberly, and in the beginning, the very little things. The very little things. For example, funding that gives even the funder some kind of joy in terms of the partners who are coming together to be able to solve a particular intervention. And so once we come with the mindset that, yes, of course, we have frameworks, we have some priority areas, but is there a way where we can look at how do we look at funding initiatives or support into that are able to deal with the little things that bring joy to the funder, that through its initiative, he has been able to impact a particular society or maybe bring some joy in not only the researcher into a very basic community about a research that has done embark on a particular change or became an intervention that has made some impact within a particular duty. So context-wise about the very little thing, even the acknowledgement and appreciation that through these funding mechanisms, we've been able to do this. And these are some of the things that as we go on and do as funders, it goes a long way to helping. Thank you very much.
Okay, I think we should avoid frameworks and rules really very rigid with that previous established and without knowing the context. I think it's very important to consider flexibility, dialogue, otherwise it's impossible. In our case, we have to put 27 state funding agents with different budgets, with different conditions, up to the north of Brazil, or a well-established one as FAPESP from São Paulo, and all of them have to be in international cooperation, so we have to be flexible and find a way. So we have to avoid frameworks to read it before understanding the possibilities of collaboration.
You just want this mic back and we'll deal with it. I was going to say standardization, but I think everyone else has said that. So instead, I'll say avoid transactionality. Yes, everyone is in a relationship or a partnership because of something we want to achieve from that. But I think quite actively recognizing what we do want to achieve from each other and that can be beneficial to each other. leads to a place where actually we're invested in the partnership for the sake of it, beyond what you get from it. And that then helps actually transform the way you operate into a way that's much more equitable and I think achieves better outcomes as a result. Whereas if you're just being transactional, it's almost a case of, you know, you sign on the dotted line, you're handing over this and I'm handing over that. The minute that's done, it ends. And that doesn't really lead to those kind of long-term, deeper understandings of each other and deeper, more impactful outcomes that we actually want to achieve. So yeah, standardization, but also avoid being transactional.
I see there's a lot of thinking in the room because I see people's faces and they're very, they're concentrating very hard, and I can see lots of questions on their faces. So it's now your turn. If you have any questions, you see, I told you. Look at the heads. We'll start with you and then we'll move this way.
Hi, thanks everyone. I'm interested. I guess I work in the research management side of things, at the back office side, and for me, you know, often those sort of simple changes, the process changes, can often be incredibly impactful. And I wonder if, you know, I think, you know, you've obviously said we don't want big frameworks that we can share, but are there changes that you've made in your own practice that you would really like other funders to adopt? Is there like something that you've got some ideas worth spreading that you want to get out there and see where that can be adopted more widely?
I'm going to use the privilege of already having the mic in my hand, but it's not necessarily process, but it's building into the way you do things enough time to actually know what's going on and know what needs to be done, as opposed to just taking something off the shelf. It's honestly the time that goes into the contextualizing what you're doing makes so much more of a difference, I think, than maybe just a small policy change.
So one thing that we've flip-flopped on over the years is incentivizing the time it takes to build a partnership before an award actually comes up. So we have loads of experience doing like sandpit events or seed funding for partnership building specifically. We've never done this whole scale at Wellcome, but if someone wants to help, I think it's a great way to get people to start thinking about partnerships, and also you can build up the knowledge of how to do a partnership well in different particular contexts, and I think some of Wellcome's responsibility is to share that knowledge. So yeah, I'm interested in that.
Just let me share one practical example around the framework and processes, especially in terms of ensuring flexibility in the granting processes. So I talk about the Science Granting Councils Initiative. Now about 20 councils or funding agencies within sub-Saharan Africa. So as a funder, or NRF South Africa got in touch with me, says that CFAS, there we have, there's a PI within your country. We've given him a grant, he awarded a grant. We have to take him through due process or due diligence. However, we realize that already looking at the time frame, we are behind. Do you know this particular researcher? Have you been working with them? So yeah, we've been working with them. We've awarded grants to them. So on the basis of the fact that there is a representation so far as the Science Granting Council is concerned, NRS South Africa gets in touch with me. Then we said, okay, we then in touch one from one of our universities, the University of Health and Allied Sciences. Then we said, okay, we've gotten the grant, so we arrange a meeting. Then instead of then disbursing so that the institution will now go through the entire process, due diligence and all those things, we have built our credibility. Our systems are about GFG, good price, good rating. Then we hold the funds and disburse the funds to the institution, because then we have set up that particular framework between ourselves and the university that we are working with. So these are some of the things that, even though there are frameworks and models for how the funding processes are being engaged, as we engage and practices go on, there are the tendency that the review in terms of how we're able to streamline the processes to make the research more applicable, and also to expedite action in funding research equitably. Thank you very much.
All right, thank you very much, the panelist. I am Abutu Freeman.
Can I answer?
Okay.
Can I? Yeah, we have the different experiences. We have experiences in agreements with countries, specifically with institutions, national councils, but we have also experiences participating in the European Horizon Europe, in the partnerships. So there, besides the possibility of the 27 funding agencies having researchers participated in the projects, we are together with other, sometimes 15, 16 countries. So the experience to deal with the different possibilities of financing the projects, the specific rules of each funding agency, we are able to make a governance of this. I think this is really the importance of CONFAP. We can do a governance, we organize this, and the researchers of different states can be in this joint projects or even bigger partnerships. And we have a very nice experience that I would like briefly to point out. It's called Amazonia Plus 10. It's a project to develop the Amazonia region that all the state funding agents came together to be in there with international partners, and it involves in the projects not only researchers at the universities, but local community researchers among indigenous, among the local community, and this is really a nice experience, but there is a lot of things that we have to do in order to make this possible. But it's a very nice possibility to improve our collaboration with these projects.
All right, thank you very much. I want to know, how do you tackle the lack of political will in the drive for collaborative research, particularly as it has to do with funding? I am Abutu Freeman Gabriel.
I think any one of you can take it.
Right. So we know from the perspective of probably Sub-Saharan Africa and even wider, much of fundings, we do not receive much of funding from the private sector. The funding are basically government-driven in terms of how probably Abuja Declaration, all those things that government should be able to commit at least a percentage of funding to what into GDP. We have seen that over the years, even though there are efforts to be able to improve, to be able to contribute, one of the key things that we will be able to look at to solve the issue of political will in those researches is that I'm speaking because I sit both as a researcher by chemistry for a very long time, 10-something, 11 years, and also as a policy maker, right? The question is that the way the politicians think is not the same way the researchers think, and that must be made. So for the politician, it's interesting about how government priorities and processes are being implemented. So, for example, if you are asking him to give him $1 million into funding maybe research into malaria, you ask, why wouldn't he use that particular money to go and buy beds or build some infrastructure so that his community will come and see that, on the basis of that, you know that these politicians are able to do something, right? But then it's the responsibility of the researcher to be able to convince the politician that a research into malaria and how it's able to impact. Once you are able to solve that particular problem, there's no need for you to create infrastructure or provide best for them. And so what we've done is to be able to identify champions among within the political, you may be able to understand the political, we talk about the political struggle, the political power systems and all those things, so far as equitable funding is concerned. So you identify some kind of champions within the political and even around ministers or even presidents, so that at that particular level, these are people who are pushing, talking about investment in research, talking about how do we support researchers. And the case example can be talk about NRF South Africa, His Excellency Braden Zemandi helping. I can talk about back home, our president, John Dramani Mahama, during our RISE conference. We were there, and then it was whispered to the Academy of Arts and Sciences that, there is a need to support the RISE initiative. He said, okay, he doesn't have money, but at least once it's research, he can support the initiative with $1 million. And so once he has been able to make that particular announcement, his other colleagues takes it up. And so I know that now there's an initiative where they are looking at an African research which is being driven by both the EU Commission as part of the implementation of SISTA together with other NEPA. So these are some of the ways that we can be able to do the political way. Yes, of course, there's a need for the politicians. You know that they must put funds inside, but how do we as researchers who convene them? Don't forget, most of the things that they say is that to what extent are our researchers making those particular impact? Even though they say that, they are the very same people. When you go and you engage them in parliament or in cabinet and you present, say, hey, what is the evidence? What is the evidence? What is the evidence? So what is the evidence? You need evidence from what? From research. Yeah, also. So even though it's asked about evidence in research, it means that it's quite interested in those particular research. So it's about how we package it, engage them, look at champions within them. Then when we get a champion within among even cabinets and they're able to drive that, you see that the willingness for government to put in place money to support research is there. And those areas around parliament works quite well because in parliament they are one together. You hardly see them dissenting on things that they think that is a common good, even though they represent different parties and opposition. So these are some of the practical ways that we're able to drive the political will. Thank you very much.
There's a couple of questions. There's two here, and then we'll take those three there. Just be mindful of time as well.
Yeah.
So after these two, we'll take the three there, and then we can take the session.
Okay. Thank you very much, Chair. And my questions for my UKRI colleague and to a lesser extent Wellcome Trust colleague. We did some research at the University of Bristol about trying to put the Africa Charter into practice and the issue, how do you actually develop African-led research? And lots of the issues came down to funding, quite frankly. And I'd be interested to just for you to reflect a little bit on some of the barriers that were identified. The difficulties, for example, of restrictions on African-based leadership and funding eligibility is still a problem, although it has been addressed to some extent, I know. There's still the lack of time, which you mentioned actually before, which I really welcomed, around the short time frames to develop genuinely co-creative research projects. It takes a lot of time. The misalignment in cost and payment models across countries. So, you know, in the UK, universities are used to paying up front and then reclaiming the money. But with our African partners, that's often impossible. They just can't do it. And there's often very limited flexibility in funding modalities to facilitate that. And then other things as well, and then I'll stop. It's around, for example, multilingual dissemination. There's funding often for open access, but in established Western journals, there's limited funding for funding in African languages in journals based on the continent. So those were just some of the things that came up from our research. I wondered if you'd be kind enough to reflect, and GCRF, rest in peace.
So just because I work for DSIT, not UKRI, this is not a UKRI opinion, but we are the sponsor department for UKRI. I mean, I think I'd say that I can be in two mindsets about that. I have the mindset of what I as an official have to, the sorts of things that as an official I have to manage in these kind of activities, and then the mindset of what maybe as an academic I would think alongside that. And I think that probably actually helps to highlight why certain things don't turn out in the way we would like them to do. As a government official, when I'm putting forward bids for funding, when I'm trying to set up how these funds work in the first place, we've got all of these concerns around trying to make things as equitable as possible, trying to make things as impactful as possible, trying to make things as transparent as possible. But then we've also got the other side of that is I have to still follow the rules around due diligence of use of UK taxpayer money. That isn't necessarily always compatible with some of these concerns. A really easy one. So most of our financial rules would come from what's called the Treasury Green Book, and it can be really quite specific and it can be really quite onerous. And a lot of the discussions we have around flexibility, around can we pay up front versus claiming afterwards, that often doesn't come down to decisions we can make. We have to follow our own set of rules. And I think actually this is where it links to how we talk about equitability in the first place. It isn't a transactional arrangement of us just providing funding. It's us as a partner, as an investor, but that also comes with things that we have our own responsibilities that we have to be doing with that. Can more be done? Almost definitely. And I think that is an ongoing conversation that needs to continue, and definitely just through the patch that I am responsible for, we're really keen to continue those conversations and try to build things better. But beyond those, you also talked about time and funding cycles, which I will say are almost completely exogenous to what any of us have any control over. Political funding cycles are based on politicians, and it's based on accounting frame, windows for how funding has to work. And then the decisions around the level of that funding also are made by politicians for political reasons, which I think actually links to the previous question of it's how you set up the incentive structures to try and encourage them to do these things in one way or another. And those politicians will be operating with multiple incentives which are leading them to these decisions about when funding happens, about how much funding is available. Obviously, as an official, I can't pass comment on particular politicians or particular decisions. I'm just explaining why the things happen the way they do. And it's because we have lots of other obligations and lots of other interests that we're also responsible for. And it doesn't necessarily always add up in a way that would be ideal for one outcome. But it's almost a bounded rationality of why things are that way. That might be a bit of a cop-out of an answer, but I hope it's explaining at least why I think things are the way they are.
All right, thank you for this privilege. Olawale Akinrinde by name. I'm an African, and I need to state my bias before I'm giving my opinion. I'm also a political scientist, and thank you for your perspectives that you have shared with us. They are really illuminating. As a political scientist, I'm interested in power relations. Of course, the last speaker talked about how the funders determine everything, from agenda setting, what to produce, for whom to produce, and it all boils down to the fact that they are the one funding. It boils down to the fact that they are the one funding. And my question is, if they continue to fund, there will be inequality, and we cannot run away from that. He will place the piper, dictates the tune. So I was thinking that, will it ever be possible for the word funding to be reimagined? Because from the word itself, funding, it connotes power. It suggests power. I'm funding you. You have to do my bidding. Many of us were funded to this place. So whatever we do here must conform with what the funders wanted. So I as a political scientist, I'm imagining a situation where we can begin to see funding as a social good. Not really, not just a responsibility, a social good to humanity. And when the funders are able to see it from that light, they will not be leveraging their positionality to give unattainable conditions to the funding. It's not just about the funding that comes from the global north to the south. Even internal funding system within the global south is the same thing. So we must begin to reimagine the concept of funding. Our policymakers must understand that funding is not just a responsibility, it is a social good. And because somebody talked about political will, it is because the politicians see funding as a means of what? Political power advantage. And that is why they can decide to fund A and not fund B. They can decide to give a society light and decide not to give another society because they see funding as a political level. And this also goes to academic funders too. They mustn't continue to see funding as a way, as just a responsibility, but a social good to the elevation of humanity. So that is my take. Thank you.
Thank you for that. We are all here to co-create.
Thank you, Chair. My name is Harriet from Kenya. It's like my brother here has stolen my thoughts because when you interact with the people here, the big elephant in the house in matters to do with research is funding. And my question to the panelists is, what are some of successful strategies that you have developed, that you have helped your institutions that are in charge of funding to implement in order to ensure the research that's being funded is impacting the countries? Because most of the time we fund, but what's the outcome? Is the project impactful? Maybe you can share some of the strategies that you have developed. Thank you.
I can mention a couple initiatives that Wellcome, or large-scale infrastructure institutes that Wellcome has funded over quite a long period of time. I think the history of how they started is interesting and unsavory. But then as we've moved into the current world that we live in, it very much is thinking of how priorities are being set for research agendas in that particular area. And my colleagues who do a much better job than I do ensure that it's interlocking with government systems. So places like KEMRI, RE, OCRU, the large investment in Vietnam, and then MORU, the large investment in Thailand. Some of these funding arrangements have been around for about 30 years. And so it's long-term investment, long-term reflection on Wellcome, and people like my colleagues who have been changing the system there.
I can give an example of how we did it through the Newton Fund, which links back to the point I made before of actually designing your partnerships around what you both want to achieve. Research is almost the middle stage from what happens first to make the research happen, then you've got the research, and then you've got what the research actually translates into. And really it's that bit that most of us are interested in, right? Because that's where all the actual impact happens. Whether that is government making a policy change, whether it's creating a product, whatever it is. And the way that you do that is you look at it from that ecosystem perspective. What actually are the priorities we're trying to make the changes against? What are the things that can make those changes? And therefore, how does my research feed into that? Which you then overlay with the question about funding. Where is the funding for this bit? Where is the funding for that bit? And where is the funding for the other bit? And this is where it really has to come from a higher level of you have to set up these impact pathways to cover all of those bits. Otherwise, you are just funding a bit here and a bit there. They might overlap, they might not, and it's not great. So actually having the ecosystem's view in areas that you're all actually interested in doing, because that also means government's more likely to actually fund more of it, because they're like, oh, actually, we care about this. We're going to take your research outcomes and we're going to do something with it. So that's the thing for us. It's about aligning the interests with the ecosystem.
Yeah, I think science as a good for society, impact in society is the first principle that I think we have to consider as scientists or as funders or whenever we are in the chain of the system of STI, how we can reach this better. Certainly there are some strategies that the country has, that some priorities, you have federal funds, state funds, and you have to work on this. But I believe that really we are moving forward, and I think this is very important. And I've been to the first conference. I think that really look at this subject. What is equitability? How can we do better? Who we have to involve? How we have to do better calls or establish better partnerships? If this is in front of us, we'll do better, I believe. We will improve this. But as I said, it's a process because it involves really many challenges, different contexts. But I think this it was really what we are doing better, looking at this and say, how can we do better in this process of inclusion, of considering impact, mutual benefits and mutual interests? How can we do this?
Just to add that, there are quite a number of success stories within, especially the Sun Branching Cancers Initiative, as to what we've been able to come out with based on what funders have given for particular research in the various thematic areas. And so how are we able to ascertain that? Just quite recently, the councils will be able to develop what you call the research innovation management framework. Not only that, that one tells about based on national priorities within the specific countries, what is that you can fund? How are those funding linked to national priorities? And how are those impacts going to be going to assess? Aside that, from the perspective of both the funder and the research community, we have also come out to call research impact evaluation. This research impact evaluation determines that, okay, so for a particular researcher, even before he undergoes research, he's able to identify how those particular research, if there are resources to be able to undertake them, the need to be able to address specific country needs based on some identify criteria area. So at the end of the research, aside the assessment or evaluation that has done, this research impact evaluation framework, we have the need for the people within the grant office to go inside to be able to assess and be able to add. Don't forget, I talk about some linkages between how the funders themselves and also the givers of the fund, which are government in itself, where even at times we have relationship where the parliamentarians have oversight. So that times, within some time, they arrange when we are going on monitoring, to go to audit. They said, oh, we are interested, they also want to go. Then we create a platform for them to come and tell some of the, they also have created prototypes, they are there, they come to look at it. Those who through health have developed access systems to reduce maternal health and what have you. Those who have used AI in health technology, there are quite a number of them. You could see, even when you go around, some of the posters that has been exhibited through this particular workshop is making that particular impact. We try to engage them so that as much as possible, they'll be able to know that the funding that you are giving for councils to be able to do research, this is what is paying off, and on the basis of that, they continue to talk about how the funds are making impact, so that when you go to them, they can also give you more to be given to researchers to do their research. So these are some of the dynamics and the mechanisms. Thank you.
Thank you. Brenda from Uganda. Just attending this conference and the different breakout sessions, a lot of questions have been packed via the parking lot for further discussion, and some have even become questions that deserve their own conference with a different set of stakeholders for us to, let them know about this topic on equitable partnerships. I think my question is, what are the funding institutions doing to build more research capacity in equitable partnership as a thematic cross-cutting theme, beyond just the speculations and the questions? Are there opportunities that are available for postdoc students to do more research in some of these topics we have packed and bring this evidence in the next conference, that we are speaking from an evidence-informed perspective than just all of us with our ideas and we're all looking at each other, we are packing more questions and packing more questions. Just those opportunities for researchers. These are some of the areas early career researchers could go into to help funders make ideal calls from a more strategic point of view. So really, that's my question. Thank you.
Sounds like a great idea. I know our colleagues at the British Academy have been they've funded a few studies into looking at evidence of equitable partnerships, but kind of the philosophy and conceptualization of equitable partnerships, I don't think is being funded by Wellcome at the moment, for example. But yeah, it's a great idea.
Hi, sorry. So this is more a question for James, but I actually invite everyone to sort of reflect on this as well. More forward-looking piece as we're going to dinner. You talked about structure, legacy funding like GCRF and Newton, and how we can adapt different funding models for sort of context-specific manner. And today we heard about equity versus justice that addresses systemic changes, actually, not to pinpoint differences in individuals or even context. We also sort of heard from African partners here that they need to depend less on sort of external sources of aid. And I was wondering whether, in a context of shifting ODA and going into more and more national economic growth, defense, security, data sovereignty, all these sort of, questions about where are we going with that as well. So I was wondering where would you see the things sort of shifting towards in the future, and also thinking about mutual priorities, what can be done to continue the momentum while avoiding to be growth-driven and extractive in a sense. So just wanted to hear from your thoughts.
I think that's a very difficult question. Where are things going? I mean, the key point of an equitable partnership, regardless the topic of it, is about we're working together on something that we both care about, frankly, right? The equity comes more in the way we're managing that relationship, but it's still a case of the relationship exists because we both care about something. And so I think, yes, the UK government, like a lot of other European governments in the US, ODA budgets have reduced. That doesn't mean we're not still engaging with the world, right? And I guess it's a point of we're still interested in working with everyone on everything, right? It's just a case of making sure those relationships are being structured in a way that we're both mutually interested in working together. And I don't think that mutual interest will go away. We're always going to want to be doing research in the Amazon, in West Africa, looking at preventable pandemics. We're always going to be looking at wanting to discover new things together, and that isn't all just going to happen in the UK or in Europe or in the global north. There's talent, there's resources, there's infrastructures, there's knowledge, there's everything everywhere else in the world as well. And I don't think that's ever going to go away. Will the scope and the scale change? Probably. I'm not sure I can really give a proper answer on that. I do know that like I said before, we have committed another £1.5 billion over the next 4 years just for research with the Global South. That is on top of working together through Horizon Europe, which is, I can't remember how big that is, but we put in something like 2 to 3 billion a year just into that on top of the broader Horizon Europe, the size of it. The opportunities aren't going away. They might change. They might become a little bit more doing things in the national interest. But I don't think that's anything new, if I'm honest.
Okay, sorry. So I'm wary of the time, so I think I'll just shorten my question and then ask the rest tomorrow. I just think on the funding issue, especially when we talk about equity, I just wanted to know from the funding agencies, I know you may say it's not your job to do this, but to what extent do you engage, for example, with the African Union? I know there's engagement with the science councils, but I feel like when you look at the African Union agenda, there's a lot of deliverables which are promised, but our governments don't invest that much in research. So I just wanted to know from the funders' point of view, and also I guess from the political point of view, I mean, to what extent is that agenda also being pushed? Because that would then make it a real equitable sort of engagement if there is some kind of eco-focus on the funding.
So I can speak a little bit about some of my colleagues' work, particularly in these institutions that Wellcome has deep relationships with, and right, I've asked our policy team, are you the right people to go in and influence the African government or particular agencies? Could you work with others to do this? Most of that work will be done through these institutions, right? And like, on the previous question around what are tangible things that you've done, our team helped co-create like evaluation frameworks for the impact of work that's going on in the institutions. So it was, okay, our team has some knowledge of evaluation and impact, but we want to hear with you all what the actual priorities are and what you know are the things that will make different governments and politicians tick, and how those can be built into those frameworks for how people are evaluating the impact of research. Yeah, it's a fine balance between going in and being welcome, at the seat of the table or trying to influence and facilitate an ecosystem where research can do well.
Let me just add that one of the things we identify through running AGCI 1 and 2 for 10 years was about the funding policy linkage. And so for the next phase of the Sun Country Council Initiative, which is phase 3, one of the key aspects you're looking at is about how we are linking the fundings to AU Agenda 2063. So come next week, we know we have the AU Ministers meeting in Addis Ababa from the 9th to the 13th of February. As part of that particular meeting, the Sun Country Councils Initiative is having a side meeting on the margins of the AU agenda, where we've engaged other NEPAD on behalf of the AU Commission to have a section purposely to talk about SGCI 3, which is made up of the councils and how it has impacted the country over the years, and what is it that they are going to expect for the next phase 2026 to 2030. The idea is to bring to their attention some of the statistics, then also use the opportunity to woo the president and the ministers and to be able to happen their investment in research within that particular space. We'll launch the AGCI 3 in together with the sister 2034 document that has been prepared. Then again, there's a time that a whole workshop is dedicated to looking at AU agenda, STISA, and also AGCI 3 on the 12th of February in Addis coming. So these are some of the things that we are looking at about the interface between policy and engagement with the African Union. Thank you very much.
Now, just to say that as CONFAP, we have a lot of collaboration north, south and north. And now we are moving toward collaboration south and south. And we are very much interested in moving forward with African countries. I think we have a lot of potentialities, similarities, and we are trying to link other institutions in order to build up together possibilities of establishing partnerships in science, technology, and innovation. And so we are very much open to this. That's the only message I would like, final message. We really are considered very important.
Thank you very much. And I think with that, we'll close the session. We're already 9 minutes over time. But thank you, colleagues. And I think join me to just saying thank you to the panel as well. Wonderful. And just a few housekeeping rules. Dinner will be served in the Amber Room at 6 p.m. So when you get out of this room, if you turn left, you'll see the big Amber sign right down the corridor. That's where dinner is going to be. And thank you, colleagues, so much for this. And thank you to the panel as well. Enjoy the rest of your evening.